I admit that the Negro, and especially the plantation Negro, the tiller of the soil, has made little progress from barbarism to civilization, and that he is in a deplorable condition such as emancipation, that he is worse off in many respects than when he was a slave. I am compelled to admit, but I contend that the fault is not his, but that of his heartless accusers. He is the victim of a cunningly devised swindle, one which paralyzes his energies, suppresses his ambitions, and blasts all his hopes. And though he is nominally free, he is actually a slave. I here and now denounce this so-called emancipation as a stupendous fraud. A fraud upon him, a fraud upon the world. It was not so meant by Abraham Lincoln. It was not so meant by the Republican Party. But whether so meant or not, it is practically a lie. Keeping the word of the promise to the ear and breaking it to the heart. Do you ask me why the Negro of the plantation has made so little progress, why his cupboard is empty, why he flutters in rags, why his children run naked, and why his wife hides herself behind the hut when a stranger is passing? I will tell you, it is because he is systematically and universally cheated out of his hard earnings. The same class that once extorted his labor under the lash now gets his labor by a mean, sneaking, and fraudulent device. The device is a trucking system which never permits him to see or save a dollar of his hard earnings. The struggles like a man in a morass, the more he struggles, the deeper he sinks. The highest wage paid him is $8 a month, and this he receives only in orders on the store, which in many cases is owned by his employer. The script has purchasing power on that one store and that one only. A blind man can see the laborer is by this arrangement bound hand and foot, and it is completely in the power of his employer. He can charge the poor fellow what he pleases and give what kinds of goods he pleases, and he does both. His victim cannot go to another store and buy, and this the storekeeper knows. The only security the wretched Negro has under his arrangement is the conscience of the storekeeper, a conscience educated in the school of slavery, where the ideal prevailed in theory and practice that the Negro has no rights which white men were bound to respect, an arrangement in which everything in the way of food or clothing, whether tainted meat or damaged cloth, is deemed good enough for the Negro. For these, he is often made to pay a double price. But this is not all, or the worst result of this system. It puts it out of the power of the Negro to save anything of what he earns. If a man gets an honest dollar for his day's work, he has a motive for laying it by and saving it for future emergency. It will be as good for us in the future, and perhaps better a year hence from now. But this miserable script has in no sense of the quality of a dollar. It is only good at one store and for a limited period. Thus the man who has it is tempted to get rid of it as soon as possible. It may be out of date before he knows it, or the storekeeper may move away and it may be left worthless on his hands. But this is not the only evil involved in this satanic arrangement. It promotes dishonesty. The Negro sees himself paid but limited wages, far too limited to support himself and family, and that in its worthless script, and he is tempted to fight the devil with fire. Finding himself systematically robbed, he goes to stealing, and as a result finds his liberty, such as it is, taken from him. And him himself put to work for a master in a chain gang, and he comes out, if he ever comes out, a ruined man. Every northern man who visits the old master class, the landowners and landlords of the South, is told by the old slaveholders with a great show of virtue that they are glad that they are rid of slavery and would not have the slave system back if they could, that they are better off than they ever were before, and much more of the same tenor. Thus northern men have come home duped and go on a mission of duping others by telling them the same pleasing story. There are very good reasons why these people would not have slavery back if they could, because far more creditable to their cunning than to their conscience, with slavery they had some care and responsibility for the physical well-being of their slaves. Now they have as firm a grip on the freedman's labor as when he was a slave, and without any burden of caring for his children or himself. The whole arrangement is stamped with fraud and is supported by hypocrisy. And I here and now, on this Emancipation Day, denounce it as a villainous swindle and invoke the press, the pulpit, and the lawmaker to assist in exposing it and blotting it out forever.
Few Americans truly understand our prison system. Even fewer realize that within the walls of prisons across America, an entire workforce has been developed, one that works for third world wages and actually accrues massive amounts of debt that can send someone back to prison even if they've served their time. Earlier this week, I spoke with author and journalist Chris Hedges, and I began by asking him to give me a basic understanding of some of these misconceptions that we have about America's prison complex.
We have 25% of the world's prison population and 5% of the world's population. So prisoners under the 13th Amendment essentially work as in a form of neo-slavery for about $1.30 a day. We are seeing huge numbers of for-profit corporations from Chevron to Victoria's Secret to Target to Hewlett-Packard use or exploit prison labor. We have seen private corporations now become predatory within prison walls, phone companies charging 15 cents a minute, forcing you to prepay your plans with very high surcharges. You pay $10, you got to pay $3 to the phone company. The privatization of commissaries, where prices have risen by over 100%. I have a list of the 1996 commissary prices in New Jersey and the ones today. Things have, in almost every case, at least doubled. I mean, for instance, if you want to buy an envelope, they sell them singularly. It costs you 15 cents. If you buy a 100-pack of legal-size envelopes, it's $7. That, of course, is more than double in price. Fines that are levied at the time of sentencing, and remember, these people are making $28 a month. They're working 8 hours a day. It takes them forever to pay their fines off.
Let me jump in there for a second, because I want to get some details on some of this. You're giving me a lot of information, but let's go back for a minute to what you said about corporations, major corporations in the United States, and you give a long list here, including Starbucks, right, AT&T, Microsoft, right, Procter & Gamble, Wendy's. How are those corporations using the prison populations as a workforce? How does that happen?
Well, they move behind prison walls. We have most of, military uniforms, vests, canteens, all of which is made by federal prisoners. It's forced labor, and it's massive, and it's extremely profitable, which is part of the problem of mass incarceration, because we have corporations and the lobbyists for those corporations writing these draconian laws to keep people locked behind bars for decades for crimes that in other countries they might not even be arrested for. I mean, half of the prison population never committed a violent crime.
Right, they're nonviolent crimes. But let me ask you this. You say that a prisoner in New Jersey, for instance, back in 1980, for 8 hours of work was paid $1.20, and today right, that same prisoner makes $1.30 for 8 hours of work. And you also mentioned that, the other standards that we would have in terms of protections for workers, workplace safety requirements, none of those things are applicable here.
Right. And you now have prison administrators going to large corporations that are running sweatshops overseas and saying, come back. They can't organize. You don't have to pay benefits. They earn, 20 cents, 15 cents an hour. They're always on time for work, and if they're ever disruptive, we put them in isolation.
Right, so it's easy to control that workforce population. Something else you might mention here, you talk about the fact that these phone companies, for instance, will come in and the kinds of things they do here in order to derive huge profits from prisoners who are being held include things like placing extremely high commissions by state agencies on right, those phone charges. They have all kinds of kickbacks on here that we in the regular public would never tolerate or put up with, and this happens to prisoners, again, as you said, who are making $28 a month, and it's happening right, in every prison in America?
Right. And these, that's why states have allowed these corporations to go in, because the kickbacks can run as high as 40%. So you have a captive market. You have a for-profit company running the commissary. There's nowhere else to shop. They set the prices, whatever it is. You know, and then there are all sorts of draconian fees. If you have, for instance, in New Jersey, a loved one, an immediate family member who is dying or is dead, you can get a 15-minute deathbed visit or a 15-minute viewing, but you get charged up to $900 to pay the guards. Now, if you're earning $28 a month, you can imagine how long it takes to pay that off. And it used to be that families could send up to 50 pounds of, like, sneakers. You know, that's the other thing. Prisons now are no longer providing the most basic items, including footwear. So you've got to buy $45 Reebok sneakers. And if you can't afford it, you've got to take out a loan. So coupled with these fines, coupled with the loans, and you got to pay to see the doctor, you got to pay for medicine, you got to pay for legal copy and everything else, you are now getting large numbers of prisoners who are actually being released heavily in debt, thousands of dollars in debt. There's no work. And if they can't pay that off, they go right back into prison.
They're actually sent back to prison for not being able to pay loans they had to make in prison in order to get the basic necessities they need to live in prison.
Well, and let's not forget they're working 8 hours a day, and they're not eligible for Social Security. So they can work 30 years inside the prison, 8 hours a day for a for-profit company,
and never receive that.
They finish in debt, and they're not, and because they never paid into Social Security, they're not eligible for Social Security.
Chris, last thing I want to cover with you, your article here ends with a very sobering idea. It talks about the fact that when strong family ties are retained by prisoners, that the recidivism rate is so much lower. And we all know that for a fact, that when family gets involved, if you want to lower that recidivism rate, you do so by involving family. And you talk about the fact that these prisons are now working very hard to keep families from visiting loved ones who are locked up. And you end by saying this. You say, prisoners with life sentences frequently urge loved ones to sever all ties with them and consider them dead, simply because it is a humiliating process now for family members and children to be able to come and visit those who are locked away. Last word on that.
Well, I mean, you go into a prison, any prison in this country, first of all, people are waiting outside in the rain and the snow, elderly people, children, mothers with strollers for hours with no access to bathrooms. Then they are treated as if they are prisoners once they come in. The children are terrified. They're crying. It's so traumatic even to get in and see a family member. And then on top of that, I think we have to remember that most of the forms of communication between a parent who is incarcerated and their child is over the phone lines, and of course they're gouging them for 15 cents a minute. It's and destroying those family ties accelerates the process of recidivism, which is about 64%, and you have for-profit prisons like Correction Corp of America, well, they say on their website, high recidivism rate proves that we're a good investment. You know, there's no forms of rehabilitation anymore. The system is designed to funnel people back into the system because it makes those who run the prison industrial complex a profit.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, and I would encourage all of our viewers to go and to read your article over at Truthdig and to get into what you just mentioned there as well. The number of investors who are stepping in and now investing in these private prisons because they see the value in it. And again, it's become a very profitable business. Chris Hedges, reporter and journalist, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.